This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our new sponsor, Impact Tactical. They're a tactical outfitter for first responders and military. Me, guys, personally, I can vouch for them and their quality service. I've used them for the last 11 years of my career. Be sure to check them out at impacttactical.com. That's MPAK tactical.com. And be sure to tell them that Two Cops, One Donut sent you. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by HRH Combat Arms. They can turn your vision into reality. They specialize in gunsmithing and Cerakoting. Your Cerakote specialist is Air Force veteran and retired police sergeant Paul Ware, a.k.a. the Sarge. He can Cerakote your firearms, auto parts, tools, even your sports equipment. This veteran-owned business is located at 5025 Saunders Suite 103, Fort Worth, Texas 76119. You can call them at 682-304-0363, and you can find them online at www.hrhcombatarms.com. That's www.hrhcombatarms.com. All right, welcome back. Two Cops, One Donut. I am your host, Eric Levine, and today I have kind of a treat for myself, a fellow roller, fellow BJJ guy, and police officer out in Hawaii at Bellevue Police Department. Officer Craig, you say your last name, please.
Good morning, Craig Hanaumi.
Hanaumi. Okay, I knew I was going to butcher that. So my last name is Levine, and people butcher it all the time. So I'm just like, I'll let them say their last name so I don't kill it. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm wonderful. So kind of give you a background on this podcast. By the way, I followed you for a long time, not like a stalker style, but I've always known about you, one through Henner, because I've done the Gracie Survival Tactics courses and became an instructor and stuff like that. Any police departments listening out there, if you don't know how to get started, don't reinvent the wheel. I totally believe in GST. I think it's a great program that's out there for officers to get started. And then you can get samples from guys like Craig here and a lot of other guys that practice for the law enforcement side. The thing that I like about Craig is he really emphasizes on train how you fight, fight how you train. And it's basically wearing the uniform, because there's a lot more handles, there's a lot more sticking points for us officers when we get into any physical altercation. So with that said, sir, let's give people a little bit of your background. First off, where'd you grow up? How did you decide to become a cop?
Yeah, well, good question. So I grew up in Oahu, state of Hawaii, born and raised, and got into law enforcement actually here. I'm here on vacation visiting my family. Bellevue is in Washington.
Oh, that's not in Hawaii.
No.
Oh,
Bellevue is
shit.
Washington. And I'm just here visiting.
Okay, my bad.
No, sorry. Yeah, I started my career in law enforcement here with the Honolulu Police Department back in 2003. And I didn't have any exciting story about why I wanted to get into law enforcement. I kind of fell into it. It was a job and it was a profession that my parents both had respect for, and the academic side of my family's kind of pushed me into it, because a lot of the jobs that required degrees and stuff like that, I already had uncles or aunties or cousins that were doing those. So they set the bar pretty high. And if I was going to become like a teacher, my mom taught public school for about almost 35 years, and there's still people who had her in elementary school probably when they were probably in the 80s that remember her. Okay. And so if I became one, then it would have been I felt like, just get in line with all the rest of the other teachers in the family. And I just wanted to do something different. So my dad worked in the Department of Labor, lots of 2 union jobs, right? Teaching and Department of Labor. And they appreciated the idea of unions. And they kind of left me alone after I told them I was going to go into law enforcement. So they respected the other jobs I had done before that, but
Okay.
I felt like they were waiting for me to say a job that had stability and I guess decent retirement and the 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 things that their jobs had. So when I
Okay.
said law enforcement, they're like, all right. They kind of
Well,
left me alone after that,
in
and that's how.
teaching, you're still you're you're giving a service to the people. You know what I mean? It's not. I don't find teaching self-serving. Let's put it that way,
Sure.
where you're in it just for the money. Because obviously, we know teachers aren't rich by any means. Neither are
No,
officers. So it's a career, a profession towards service, which seems to run in the family. So is your dad a teacher as well?
no, he worked in a Department of Labor, which specifically the unemployment division. So his job was to basically screen people to see if they're eligible for unemployment,
Okay.
and yeah, he did that for about like 40 years almost. So both sides, super hardworking and service oriented work.
Yep.
I think that's a consistent theme. My younger sister is a pediatrician, so
Heck yeah.
she's academically set the bar pretty high for me. And yeah, I was not going to do anything that was going to be in school that was going to impress anybody that hadn't been done before. So I'm glad
Okay. I hear you.
I got through college somehow, and then eventually started working in law enforcement. So
Okay. What's your degree in?
I graduated in psychology. I did the 6.5 year plan for the 4 year degree, and I
I,
had
I think we all
luckily
did.
I had it. My ex was a girl that I was going out with at the time was also in psychology, and if I'm not mistaken, she's a psychologist right now. So through her good note taking, I was able to help because my handwriting is horrible. So she like look at her notes, kind of help me study, and
Okay.
yeah, I don't I don't know if I would have graduated without that help. But I made it, and it's very helpful, right? That degree is applicable for our work, and
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely. So what I love that you do, and this is kind of my message and what I'm trying to do all the time is I want to tie in the human side of law enforcement, which
sure,
is important for the community to get to know us. But I also want to tie in how use of force, jujitsu, and the community, all of those things are intertwined. And those that don't do the Brazilian jiu-jitsu side, and I'm not talking about any other art people. I'm not talking about boxing. I'm not talking about wrestling. I'm specifically focusing on BJJ because the way it is taught and the way that it is oriented is philosophically in line with police work. We don't want to hurt people, but we want to control them when they get out of hand. And we want to do that with as minimal force as possible. And that is police work. Nobody wants to get hurt because who gets hurt? The officer gets hurt. The bad guy gets hurt. And then when we both get hurt, nobody wins in that in itself. So the goal is how do we overcome our community's misconceptions on chokes and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in general and all this stuff, because I think they kind of associate it with UFC and things of that nature. And so with you, I want to get your take on, one, how are you using Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at work? How are you using it to actually minimize uses of force? And what do you think the path should be for law enforcement when it comes to learning control tactics? I know it's a loaded question.
that's a good question. No, so I mean, jiu-jitsu, obviously there's a practical application for us because of the ability to control, right? And that's our primary. It's one of our primary, I guess, missions. Controlling. I mean, the other huge difference between that martial art and other disciplines, other combat sports, is it's scalable, and you can modulate the amount of force based on the other person, and there's not really anything else that is able to do that. Any striking based art and I've spoken on this before, but the strike will either be effective or not. Like that's, it's either going to hurt the person to change behavior or it won't do anything. And because you only have two extremes, if that is the method of gaining compliance, then I mean, besides it looking terrible, that you can't, there's variables in it there that you may not even possess, like the ability to deliver effective strikes. And then, like I said, on top of it looking terrible, the other variable is the other person's perception of the pain. And sometimes when people are under the influence, strikes don't work. And that could then go all the way to the extent of having injury, but continuing to fight through that. And so anyways, yeah, scalability, I think, is a huge reason for the advantage of the art. And besides all the other stuff, like being less uncomfortable in positions that no one wants to be in, like underneath somebody, there's huge value in experiencing that in a training capacity. And I'm not, I don't know too many other arts that can replicate that kind of inoculation in training, and especially at intensities that are close to real life. And I mean, I've mentioned this before, but the biggest, one of the biggest benefits to me is the ability for the art to connect people, literally and figuratively, and using the art to empower people. I mean, that's what it did for me, and like many people, probably you too, everybody who trains, the ability to pay that forward is, I think, one of the neatest things. And so it's a practical self-defense, art that can be used by people, any size, any age. And it is also a outreach that if you use it in that way, there's not a single group of people in the community that doesn't want to learn how to protect themselves, right? So you can use it to build positive relationships. And I think that's one of the biggest, initially we start training, I started training for myself, right? It was to better myself, protect myself. But eventually that transitioned once I felt like, okay, I think I can survive a fight against a bigger, stronger person. I don't even have to submit them, but I can have a better chance of surviving. Once that I became comfortable with that, then it transitioned to, okay, now what else can I use? What else can the art be used for? And, one of the best, like I said, my position, luckily in our department, can facilitate that. And it's just building positive relationships, connecting people in our community to the art through outreach. And it's pretty cool when you can, you have that piece as well as the other pieces. Cause now it's like multiple wins, right, for everybody.
Right. The thing that I like is community policing for cops that care about community policing. It never stops. So when we're rolling, we're not cops. I mean, you're a little different because you roll in uniform. I don't think you roll in uniform all the time, but when everybody that rolls at your gym's going to find out, if they don't already know, that you're a police officer. And we can continue to build relationships just in that, because as well as I do, oftentimes jiu-jitsu gyms, they draw in the lower socioeconomical class of people as an outlet to keep them off the streets. And that's one of the things I love, because I'll be in one of my gyms rolling with felons, rolling with people I've actually arrested before. That's happened. And they come in and we talk while we're rolling. For those that never roll, you'll get there. Trust me. And when you start rolling, you'll hear the black belts and the purple belts in them. They'll be having conversations while you're struggling for your life underneath them. So that's one of the fun aspects of police work for me, is when you're at the gym and you're able to have those conversations with people in between rolling or while you're rolling. And I think it gives them a faith in police when they see that this cop is there training on his own time, on his own dime, and he's trying to get better in this one specific martial art so he doesn't have to use a higher level of force because he wasn't trained.
Yeah, I agree. It's I've rolled with people I've arrested before, and I mean, I think it, besides those things, yeah, it allows a person an opportunity. It allows the community. I mean, you're talking about specifically the, going to a jiu-jitsu gym to train, and that's that in itself, even though the training could be for you, I mean, it gives opportunity for other people who are not cops to meet one, and that's a hard thing to do. And I think people forget on in our profession that that's not, if you don't provide an opportunity to do that, nobody's going to do it. And why would they do it? Like, why would a person come up to an officer just to engage in a conversation? Like, I don't think I would do it. I would, I wouldn't want to bother, or I feel like, what would I have to guess gain from that, maybe, or wouldn't want to. I don't know. I just don't think we do a good enough job of providing platforms to connect, and that's one way. And like I said, the other stuff too. I mean, self-defense classes or seminars. I think the best application, the most rewarding one for me, there's probably two that are connected to jiu-jitsu, is using it as a way, like I said, to redirect, especially young people, like teens. We just started this year, about 3 or 4 kids in middle school, high schools, who we found out were kind of going sideways in different ways. I got to introduce them to a good friend's gym of mine, and we did a little kind of small group class. And there's another way to interact and connect like that. And then now, we got a couple of those same kids in training, thanks to my friend Belton and his gym out in Washington. It's such a perfect setup. So he has this amazing school with multiple disciplines, and I mean, there's a huge need for that kind of outlet for young people. And so when I find out about it through whoever, the principal or some counselor, or maybe even through my own interaction, somehow we get a chance to be like, hey, what you're doing can be shaped and kind of modeled in a different way, and I have a place, and there's a friend of mine who can help you if you're interested. And so it's super cool. That, and then the second one is I got to teach at a domestic violence shelter. It was a small little group kind of setting, about half dozen people, and that kind of setting, every single person is there because of physical violence. And what a amazing way to give back and share the art to people who have experienced that. It's nothing was nothing as rewarding, I think, as that for me. And anyway, so we just using it like that, I think, is one of the highest levels of being able to pay back the art for what it has done,
Yeah, I like pointing out to people like that they're trying to scale in their mind how effective jiu-jitsu can be. And so I tell them, I'm like, all right, me, I'm $190. I float between 190, 195 all the time. I know a 110-pound female who's in her early 40s now. She's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. I can't touch her. When we roll, she destroys me. I mean, I will try to use my body weight. I will try to use whatever it is. And I'm a purple belt. I'll probably be a purple belt the rest of my life because I can't stay consistent due to the job and having kids. And so I'm the intermittent roller. But she's a black belt. And even in my prime of like rolling all the time, I couldn't touch the girl at 110 pounds in her 40s. She's older than me. So if anybody out there is listening and you're like, well, what if they're way bigger than me? What if jiu-jitsu is a great equalizer. Now, body weight and size are a factor, But the better you get and more efficient you get at this art, just like Craig was saying, you know, you're not always in it to submit somebody. You're just in it to make it. And if jiu-jitsu can get you that, that's great. So with you going to a domestic violence shelter, the psychological aspect, that learning how to empower yourself, I mean, that's got to be just so freeing. And I could see how that would be super rewarding. But that goes back to, how do us as police officers bridge these gaps with the community? Now, I don't expect us to bridge the gap with every culture and climate throughout an entire city, but we can piece it off one at a time, like with what you did. You went, you talked to juveniles, you talked to the youth. You dealt with that one specific thing. Now, those kids are going to grow up with a positive influence and mindset of at least one officer, which is going to be you. And then you empowered some people that went through one of the most psychologically traumatic things, and physical, but domestic violence survivors, there's a lot of psychological repair that can have to be done there. And I think using jiu-jitsu as a cop and teaching them, I mean, man, you bridged a lot of gaps just in that.
Yeah, it's a lot of things at the same time, right? And like I said, it's wins for so many reasons. And I think the neatest thing, like you said, Eric, is that it's coming from us, right? It's coming from the empowerment, the support, right? In a way that is fairly unique, but it's the art, and it's coming from us. Humanizes the badge, gives a person something, that a skill or technique that they could use, and then it's a win for everybody. So.
Yes, I agree. So, all right, we've talked about the community policing aspect on this. I want to focus it around officers now, because we're our own worst enemy when it comes to training and stuff like that. On a department level, you tell me, this is my, I'm an advocate of blue belts. You need to be a blue belt in jiu-jitsu. And your department needs to support that. And it needs to be done within the first 2 years, barring, you know, you don't get injured in the line of duty or, you know, vacation time and stuff like that. So here's my idea proposal, sir. I want to see what someone like you has to say as a higher rank for sure. This is my idea. So most departments require some sort of physical fitness, right? So you have your physical fitness. A lot of departments give an incentive. You know, you get $200 for passing your PT test or whatever it is. And there's other mandatory training, like 40 hours of control tactics or defensive tactics. Just depends on what department you're at. But they all have different labels for them. But it's the same thing, learning how to control people physically. So you have these things. I would rather they invest that money and do a 2-year program with all the local gyms in jiu-jitsu. And they have some sort of accountability. So there's going to be some sort of roll call. You got to go once or twice a week. I don't know what the number should be. The department will pay for that. And you go as quick as it takes you to reach a blue belt level. Because, you know, some of us pick this stuff up quicker than others. But however quick it's done, you got a 2-year limit. Unless you get injured, then we can, you know, account for that later. Your attendance is taken by your jiu-jitsu instructor. Now we're building community relations with our businesses because we're supporting local jiu-jitsu gyms, stuff like that. I see the red tape. You know, you obviously want to vet your schools, because you don't want to go to a McDojo and just have somebody whipping you through a program. But and I think I understand there's some complications there, because we want jiu-jitsu to evolve around law enforcement, not necessarily tournament style jiu-jitsu. And for those listening, in tournament style jiu-jitsu, it's you're trying to get a submission, or you're trying to stall for, if you wear a gi, you're trying to stall for time. I hate the gi, by the way. So I make fun of it quite a bit. But there's the point for the tournament style of jiu-jitsu is to win and make the school look better. When I think you focus law enforcement jiu-jitsu around having a gun on you, having all these different tools that somebody can get a hold of. So keeping control of the arms and the hands and top control is really important in jiu-jitsu. For police, we want to be able to see what's going on, keep our head up and, looking around. So anyway, that's my idea. Can it be fine-tuned? Sure. But what are your thoughts on mandatory? I think blue belt's fair. I think blue belt is a fair assessment.
Yeah, I mean, belt rank, right? Subjective, depending on what area. I think thinking of it either that way as a ranking or by hours, right? I mean, I don't know what amount of hours would be a typical blue belt, but I mean, it would be a couple hundred at least, and a couple hundred hours of mat time would make a huge difference in just comfort level in bad situations, which of course gives the officer more ability to use their frontal cortex, right, their thinking brain, versus the fight or flight. And yeah, I mean, if it was unfortunately for our profession, the amount of on-duty time that is given to officers is not enough. It's not enough to be proficient in pretty much almost anything. And if you compare the hours of time that are on duty, that are provided, I mean, it's kind of hard to make an average because, I mean, there's a big difference between smaller agencies and larger ones. I mean, many of the smaller ones, I know they have none, like zero on-duty hours. So, I mean, anything more than that, I guess, is better. But what other, the standard 2 to 4 hours a year of specific ground control stuff, I mean, compare that to any other skill set of anything, you won't be proficient at it. It could be a musical instrument or a video game. I mean, that is not enough time to develop any kind of motor patterns or reflex from that small amount. And I think it's kind of what, Henner speaks on this a lot. What other profession expects a person to do something to a level of acceptable proficiency, but does not provide the training on duty to do that? Like, I don't know that many other jobs, but I would presume that if you're going to be expected to do a piece of it, your time to develop that skill set should be on the clock. It shouldn't be on your own. And I don't think it's fair it's an unrealistic expectation to expect people to do something on their own time that they're not getting paid for, that is expected of them on duty. And like I said, I mean, I just use the analogy of any other profession. And unfortunately, that's the only alternative right now. There's a lot of places that are kind of shifting into a role of allowing on-duty stuff. The Marietta PD in Georgia, right, when they started implementing Jiu-Jitsu, and they contracted out to a school. There's actually a school here in Washington that is doing the same thing. Kindred Jiu-Jitsu is doing that. Nice. With a local department. But that's the reality of many places, because you're not going to have a person in-house in the department that is a black belt instructor. That would be ideal, but it's just not realistic to expect a 70-person, 80-person or smaller department to have that, right? That's just doesn't happen. Yeah. So, I mean, how are you gonna? You would have to do, like you said, you would have to vet the school, and I know the brothers out there in Torrance, they're trying to partner with their certified training centers and start implementing that. And I mean, it makes sense because you have not only would you have a designated place with a instructor to be able to teach it, it'll actually be cheaper for the city for many reasons besides liability and L&I and all that. It's if you think, because we're trying to implement something like that in-house for our department, and if you math it out, one of our salaries, presuming we did that full time, is way more than the cost of implementing it at a school. The only challenge would be in that direction would be, like you said, to make sure that any training is better than none. But if you're really gonna if you're going to go in that direction, you should also think about, okay, well, what are the things that are the most important for us? And that's what ideally would be learned first. Not to say that other stuff isn't important, but you know, some
Right.
stuff does not apply.
Yeah.
And those things would be valuable for the art. But I mean, if we only have a finite amount of time, right? And if the goal is to get people more comfortable with that aspect of what we do, then the whole focus should be that, right? Ideally, if we're
Right.
going in perfect kind of situation. So yeah, I'm down with it. You know, I like the idea. And I think most people don't understand that the people who get into our work, I'll say almost all of them have zero training coming in, including myself. And it's unrealistic to expect a blue, purple, or whatever belt person get into law enforcement. The percentage of that happening is so small. It's and I don't even know if it should be a prerequisite, because think people say like, well, we should be at least blue belt, and it's like, well, if you talk about a prerequisite, that's like eliminating like 99% of the officers right there.
Yeah, I agree. I like that you brought up that fight or flight versus your frontal cortex. Now, I'm not a psychologist by any means, but I've dabbled in what you're talking about quite a bit, and I want people to understand two things. One, think about any time you've ever been in a fight. If you've been in a fight, I know that number has significantly dropped over the years of people that have actually been in a fight. Like a real fight, not, you know, punching your brother and sister or whatever, but like a real fight. You get an adrenaline dump, basically. Your adrenaline spikes up and you stop thinking clearly. You get tunnel vision, auditory and ocular exclusion is the technical terms for that. So you don't hear things very well. You don't see things very well. And what jiu-jitsu can help is bring that lizard brain forward, so we're thinking through what's going on. And even if we do, I will fully admit, even as a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, there have been times where I've gotten amped up. I had multiple opponents that I had to deal with, and luckily the taser scared them enough to get on the ground, because I didn't want to have to fight two guys at once. But my adrenaline spiked because that's scary. But in jiu-jitsu, even if you get up here, your motor skills, your muscle memory can help take over. You start, you know, you keep your arms, and you like these weird things just start taking over. If you get the hours, like he's talking about, you get the hours on the mat, and all of a sudden you get this automatic response that can help you survive, help you win. And then the second part I want to touch on is doing the jiu-jitsu and building this program for the community. This is the argument I want to make for y'all. If you want cops to use force less, train them to use force. Because you talk to any, I'll say, black belt in jiu-jitsu, you know, college wrestler, MMA person that's got a lot of fights under their belt, they're usually the most humble, quiet people you ever meet, and they never get in fights with people because their confidence level is so high and their training level is so high that they use force less. They're able to use their words better. The way they carry themselves, you may not see it, but there's this deterrent when you see somebody that looks and walks the walk of being a confident person, and you can just see that they know how to handle themselves. This may not be something that everybody can see, but officers like us will be out there and nobody ever tests us. They don't. I'm not the biggest guy. I'm only 5'11". I'm what I would call average. I'm 5'11", 190. I mean, you know, and guys that I work with that are even smaller. I got a guy, he's 5'3", about 120 pounds. He's a black belt. Before he got into jiu-jitsu, he was tested all the time. That's what he told me. But now that he's got his training, he said it started to happen around being a purple belt. Nobody messed with him anymore. And he couldn't quite put the two and two together until he just figured out it's his confidence level. It's the way he presents himself. All of these things can help our citizens make officers use force less. And I think that's the goal. So you train them to use force, which doesn't make much sense when you say it out loud, but you get them trained up here, and the uses of forces will drop dramatically because they can handle things before they get out of hand. It's when we don't know what we're doing and then we start drawing everything. We're bringing out the taser. We're bringing out the gun because our confidence level is down. When our confidence level and our training is down, our use of forces go up and the level of force goes up.
Yeah, no, there's a definite correlation, a negative correlation between training hours and using force, and you can equate that to our work or the general public. I mean, if you go into any gym and you look at like who's the people in here that trains every day, those people are not getting into fights outside of the gym.
No.
And if there's like I said, the more training time, the less likely that's going to happen. And I would equate that to ours as well, our work as well. And I think everybody has a point, whatever the stress is or whatever the stimulus is, that when you get past that point, you go into the fight or flight brain, which is very reflex based and just whatever, not very, very little conscious thought after that point. I think what the art does is that it increases whenever that threshold is. So everybody has one, but people who have zero training, their threshold to switch into the lizard brain or the monkey brain is like way lower because the whole thing is unfamiliar. And you contrast that with a person who has lots of mat time, lots of training. I mean, the positions, it's still scary, right? It's not gonna eliminate that feeling, but it will, because of the inoculation and just being acclimated to that kind of positions and that kind of intensity, the point or the threshold where a person goes into the non-thinking brain is increased. It's higher, right? And then I think that translates, like you said, into a person's demeanor, the way they carry themselves, and then there's data that supports that. Like the officers who train, like Marietta PD did their study, which is, I mean, that's exactly what people expected to find out, which is if you have training more often on duty, the amount of force that is used by those officers goes down. And that's not even a surprise, right? Like you would say, of course.
Yes. And our officers that get themselves in the most trouble are those 0 to 5 year officers. So imagine that number dropping dramatically if we can get them trained up within that first 2 years, which, like you said, mat time, that's the most important thing. I say blue belt because it gives people a time frame. It typically, at a legitimate gym, folks, for you listening, it takes about 2 years for the average person to reach blue belt. Now, you do have phenoms out there like BJ Penn, who made black belt in like 3 years, which is insane. But that's why he's the prodigy, and he put the hours in, though. He's smart. So jiu-jitsu is a thinking man's game when you really put it together. It's like chess. So it's the ability to see things before they happen. There's a great video. If you guys can look at Craig's, I think it's on your link tree or maybe it's on his Facebook page. He's rolling with Henner. Henner's in a suit. I watched it. Sorry. It was amazing. And Henner is a black belt with the Gracie family. So the Gracie family, they're the godfathers of jiu-jitsu. Henner could sell an ice cube to an Eskimo. He's just one of the best people to talk to. But what I like about Henner is he puts himself through police training. He knows what we're trained in, and he's adapted jiu-jitsu to that. So there's, are you an instructor for GST?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been to the course. I've been going since 2008.
Okay. So you're an instructor for them. It's a great course. Again, I'm going to keep preaching it to people out there, but he's rolling in. There's these levels. Now, Craig's a brown belt. Henner is a black belt for the Gracie family. And this is where I get into the quality of training. And it's just, you're looking at Henner and he's already 10 moves ahead, and he's toying with Craig. He's just toying with him, in a suit. And it's amazing to watch, because what I like about that is it shows this level of thinking and consciousness and how high we can really go. Training never ends. It never ends. I haven't rolled, and I'm sorry to admit this, Craig, but I haven't really rolled consistently in 3 years. I promoted, got family, just haven't had time. But I still preach it. I still watch videos. I try to stay fresh in my head as best I can. And I've gotten into some things at work where my confidence level in my game is reaffirmed because I didn't have to use much force. I already knew the positions to be in, and my level of training paid off for the muscle memory of, and I haven't rolled in 3 years consistently. So, if you guys get a chance, definitely check out his link tree. He's got a bunch of great podcasts and stuff on there. I'm going to go through them after this and listen to all of them. But, yeah, what was it like rolling with Henner in your opinion?
It was fun, man. He's like any high level practitioner, right? They have the ability to, if they wanted to, just do the same move over and over and over 10 times in a row. Like, he could do that, not give me anything. But I think the neat thing about rolling with him, and I've had the luck to roll with a lot of really, really good people, is that they make the role enjoyable for me. So he puts himself in positions that he would never be in, like on the bottom. Like, there's no way I would ever put Henner on his back unless he chose to be on his back, and I get to feel the skill level, and then lots of transitions and movement. So he, like I said, I think the funnest part about training with people like him, his brother. I mean, there's a high level black belt in our city named Nathan Orchard from the 10 Planet.
10 Planet. I know Orchard. The dead orchard's one of my favorite moves.
Yeah. I mean, same thing. I mean, just he could do just one move on me like 50 times, or he could catch me in a bunch of things and work on defense. And I think it's just, when people are, if I felt the full blast, mode, and it's crazy. And I think it's comparable. I try to find out like an analogy to compare it to, and it's like when those guys go all out, it's like a Vitamix. It's like a Vitamix blender, and you're the acai. and this you may as well just put a smile on your face and laugh about it, because there's nothing else you're gonna be able to do.
Right.
And that's like you're saying about the levels, and it's unbelievable. Like it never ends, and I think that's one of the neatest things about the art, is that you're never gonna fully get it.
Right.
I mean, and
it's constantly evolving.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so when we're talking levels, folks, like, I'm a purple belt, but I haven't rolled consistently. I haven't shown up to the gym. If I were to go to a gym, and this is what I'm talking about, levels. A blue belt, the order of belts is white, blue, purple, brown, black. So, and that's just to show you these levels. But within one belt, there's all these levels. If I were to go back to a gym, the blue belts would be destroying me. The high level blue belts, they would wreck me. And not to take anything away from beginner belts, white belts too. They would probably make it hard for me. They'd give me, and this is at reputable gyms. I am so happy that you know about 10th Planet, because that's how I got started. I did they called them hot boxes. I did a hot box 10th Planet. That's how I got started in Montana, where I was stationed. And we had, I always screw up his name. Danny Prokopos. Yes. So Danny Prokopos, he was our instructor's mentor. That was Eddie Bravo's first black belt. For anybody listening, 10th Planet is Eddie Bravo's his style of jiu-jitsu. It's a no gi style. Which goes back to why I don't care for the gi very much, because I suck with it. But yeah, 10th Planet, great gym. Dude, Nathan Orchard is a legend to me. I look at a lot of those 10th Planet guys, Einstein. I'm really good friends with a guy out of Alabama, Brandon McCaffrin. I love his stuff. He's constantly putting out 1-minute jiu-jitsu hacks. And so for anybody looking to get into this sport, martial art, whatever you want to call it, I mean, you have so many many outlets, so many different ways to look at jiu-jitsu, from your own home even. And like he was saying, like Craig was saying, doing something's better than doing nothing. And there's plenty of YouTube videos to get you started. See how comfortable you feel with the type of things you're going to be doing. I've tried to get my wife into it forever. She doesn't like being sweaty and touching other sweaty people. So I don't think I'm getting her in it.
Yeah, so I started with the gi, and I'll come from the other side too. Seems like nowadays everybody's doing no gi, which is I think from a casual fan's perspective, if you're going to have a representation of the art, probably no gi would be better, just because there's more movement or potential for movement, and I think it's harder to understand in the gi, because it doesn't look as, for the most part, matches can look like nothing's happening, and that's not very appealing. Like, I can say that as a gi person, that if I were going to watch a jiu-jitsu competition that was not my friends, like, I would get bored of it. I mean, I would appreciate the art, of course, but it's not super fan friendly, and I think that's one of the challenges to make a transition. If the point is to go in that direction, is how will it more closely, I guess, appeal to people who don't do it, right? And outside of the friends or the family of the person who is competing, I mean, lots of times there's not much else people in the audience. Then that includes any other way, like pay-per-view or something like that. And, if the goal is to make it more popular, then what representation are you going to pick? And I mean, I don't knock anybody for picking the no-gi stuff, because it does look like it's easier to understand, I think, for a person who doesn't train. With the clothing and the jacket, it's a lot more subtle stuff. Having said that, that's, to me, if I had to pick, going against a much bigger, stronger person, I would hope that they have a jacket on.
Yes.
Because that's the best way I can use to control, right? The handles and the grips that don't exist without it. It changes it. If you're using it, it changes it a lot. And I think, I mean, if we're specifically talking about the art as a sport, I mean, all the chokes from the bottom with the collar, I mean, you add that in, that's a lot of different attacks right there that don't exist without it. And then you add in all the other ones, like the sleeve controls and the lapel controls, and then it gets kind of excessive at some point, I guess, if you think about it. Less like a real situation, I guess, if you're going to call something like a street fight or something. But people always ask often, which one is better? And then I've given this answer a few times already, but I try to represent for both sides, because if we have to take custody of a person for whatever reason, arrest or protective custody, they might not have clothes on
at all.
And that's no gi right there.
Oh.
However, we always going to have clothes on. So knowing how clothing can control you is important. So that's the gi side.
Yep. And how you can use your own clothes to your advantage.
Yeah. I mean, not nobody's gonna do a lasso guard on you, hopefully, when you're wearing your jacket. But it's good to know how that feels like, and it's good to know that if there's grips like that, because like anything else, right? If I think as much as possible, you don't want to be surprised by stuff, right? In a real situation, you want to have the first time somebody grabs onto your jacket to be in a fight. Like, that's not the best time to experience that and be like, what should I do, right? And so there's value in having a variety of modalities to train in, so that the likelihood of you being surprised in a real situation is less. And that's all you can do. You can't. There's not a realistic way or time to train for every single possibility. But I mean, at least the most common ones for sure. And I mean, being grabbed by a person who's bigger, stronger is one of them. And it's just good to know what is possible. That's why I do the uniform stuff periodically. It's for selfish reasons initially. I just want to know how it feels like. Like, how different is it?
Yeah.
Is it super different, or is it like almost the same? And what happens to the gear when you go upside down or whatever? I mean, does it start like falling out of your pockets, or like what's accessible? And I mean, all those pieces, I mean, because everybody has their setup a little different. So, I mean, you can't, just because I do it one way, that doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody. And a lot of people have external vests now. So that changes it when you can put the gear on your upper torso. So it, there's not really a way to standardize, because we're all different sizes too. So my waist is like a 30. So I wouldn't be able to fit like a bunch of stuff all the way around. And I might need a external carrier for some stuff. And you know, it's I think when people ask me what is the setup, like how do you do it, I think the best answer is you should try it out yourself and figure out how it feels for you. Then you can make you can be the scientist without another person's I guess feedback, because that's the best way. Just trying it out, you know, getting a friend or some trusted person to be like, okay, let me see how this feels like.
Yeah, I agree. It's I've rolled in my uniform several times. I tested out a vest carrier, and it had Molly on it, so you could, you know, attach all your stuff. So I wanted to test that. So I had other jiu-jitsu guys like just pulling the hell out of them to see if they would break, to see if they'd hold up. And then working on, I guess it's a version of a lapel grip, having people grab a hold of your vest from the outer carrier aspect. And I learned, like, if you're grabbing my vest, that's a big advantage for me, because now I've got the underhooks and you're going for a ride. So I love the outer carrier, but just like you said, I had to find it out for myself and be my own scientist. And I did that. One, to test the gear, because I wanted to make sure it was going to hold up to being pulled on and all that, and it did wonderfully. I loved it. And then shout out to Armor Express, as a matter of fact. Armor Express is the carrier that I was testing out, and it did phenomenal. And they took all the feedback that I gave them too. I'm like, look, you know, a little weak over here, this is, you know, so they were very receptive to the feedback. But yeah, testing out your own gear, guys, definitely go through that. If you are a roller, you're just getting into it. Roller is another term for jiu-jitsu guys. If you do that stuff, test your gear out. Craig is the example, in my opinion. I think I actually saw one of his videos before you even started putting anything out yourself. I think somebody recorded you, and they're like, this is how cops should be doing it, being in the gym. And I'm like, oh shit, he's rolling in his gear. I haven't even thought to do that. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to try it out. So we did. And we had two cops rolling in their gear together, boots on and everything. And your boots, I can tell you, that is, if you start working a half guard with them boots, they ain't going nowhere. They are never getting out of your legs. With that lockdown, that 10th planet lockdown, oh man, it's gnarly. But I know you said you do like about an hour. We're at 50 minutes, but I want to get your thought on chokes. Does your department allow them? I'm of, just so you know, my stance, I wish chokes were allowed, because of my experience with rolling. People get choked out in gyms all the time, all around the nation, all around the world. When you're trained in it, it's a very safe maneuver. But I want to get what your thought and opinions on that are.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Our department had, up until 2 years ago, it as a intermediate force option. So we could do the vascular neck restraint. And like any jiu-jitsu person knows, that technique, presuming you are able to get to the position, is the closest thing to be able to neutralize the size and strength and athletic ability of a bigger, stronger person. And there's not really anything else that's comparable, not only because of how effective it is, but of how, when you do it correctly, how safe it is. And I think the easiest way to explain it, I didn't have a lot of applications, but there were 3 that I had used on duty. And 2 of them, the person went to sleep and they woke up and they were in custody. And that's exactly, without any injury, which is exactly what is supposed to happen. And I think even if you didn't take into account all the data that departments who had used, like LVNR, like I believe it was Kansas City, right? That's where the LVNR
Missouri,
started. You look at the hundreds of thousands of applications that they've had without injury. And the data anecdotally, just thinking about, well, how many jiu-jitsu schools are there in the world, and how many students, and how many times per class do people's necks get wrapped in all kinds of strangulations, and how many people are dying because of those ones. I mean, if that is happening, it is such a small percentage, way less than 1%, that, like any technique or any application of force, there will be a chance of injury no matter what action, no matter what tactic you do. There's a chance of injury for everything. Then if that's the case, then what is the likelihood of injury? And then if you look at the percentages, there's just not a way to articulate that just based by the percentage, not talking about what it looks like, because any force you use on any person does not look good. Like, I don't care what thing you do, it doesn't look good. Comparing the amount of injury to the amount of applications, and then there's been smaller studies to articulate that. I think there was one in Canada that did the likelihood of injury for the different force options. The neck restraint is one of the safest, and you can't dispute that based on the amount of applications. And you can do a study with the jiu-jitsu schools, judo schools, Krav Maga, Sambo, all the arts that practice that. You can include the UFC, amateur martial arts, mixed martial arts, jiu-jitsu tournaments. You take all the applications of everybody, and you can just pick one. You can just pick the vascular neck restraint or the rear naked choke. Just pick that, and just look at all the times that it's applied in training, in competition, and note the percentage of times that it results in a serious injury. And whatever that percent is, which is way less than 1, then look at another force option that would be the alternative.
Right.
And you just can't, it won't even be close. Like the example I recently talked about with one of my friends, Victor, is punching somebody in the face. So you punch somebody in the face as hard as you can, because if you don't do it as hard as you can, it won't be effective, right? You have to presume that there's going to be an injury 100% of the time, right? So if you're using striking as a force option to stop a person from being combative or fighting, and you're using that as the force option, and that's not counting impact tools, which would probably increase the likelihood of injury of hitting somebody in the face hard is almost 100%. And then you add on so it's already not even close to the amount that you would have if you wrap somebody's neck. And yes, there is a chance of injury, like I was talking about, for anything, but you can't effectively argue that by just the amount of times that you can apply it, that it's not safer than something else that's an alternative. And if there isn't an alternative, then what is the, people, the hard part, I think, is if you're going to remove something from the options, it should be replaced by something. And if you don't have the replacement, then all you're doing is taking away steps to higher levels of force, which is ironic because people are removing it for the same reason that that will result in the same thing, which is a higher likelihood of injury. And I think the optics have a lot to do with it, right? And I think at the end of the day, if you look at just take away the emotional aspect and just look at the data, you can't argue to remove it. If you compare it to someone on any other force option, will result in a higher likelihood of injury. And like I said, I haven't used it a lot on duty, but what other alternatives I would have done was, for my size especially, there would be way more chance of injury for sure for the person or me, and that's a lose-lose, right? Whenever that happens. So yeah, that's my thing. I unfortunately, I don't know if it will be swinging back in the other direction. It seems like it's a cyclical thing because we had it. It wasn't a option when I got to Bellevue, but it was introduced and approved in 2009. So from 2009 to 2020, we've had it, and just as was predicted, it was not being used like every single week, but for the times that it was used, and partially it wasn't used because I would say that we didn't have enough time to deploy it and train it effectively. Because if we did, I guarantee you, it would have been used more. But for the times that we did use it, it was exactly like what the data from the larger agencies, which have more applications, have, which is no serious injury or death, and it worked exactly like how it was supposed to. And the agencies like Kansas City, I mean, people don't understand that the most effective application when you if you encircle somebody's neck like that, I think it was from their department. 50% of the people give up without even compression. Just wrap somebody's neck to stop fighting.
Yeah.
So you just stop a potential encounter immediately with no injury. Like, what other thing can do that? It's just just from the practical application, safety. Like I said, ironically, people remove things like that because they, a lot of times I mean, people in legislative positions, of course, they don't have law enforcement experience, but they also don't have any kind of training at all, which is unrealistic to expect, I think, a politician to have jiu-jitsu, but without any kind of context. And of course, public perception is an inevitable part of what we do too. It's, it makes people, I think, rationalize or make decisions about things that they don't understand. And ironically, it negatively impacts everybody when things like tools like that are removed. Like I said, what's left, right? And what's left is, especially without the training, is a higher likelihood of injury for the officer or for the person being arrested, both, because there's no in between, right? It goes from some kind of escort position to like the highest level of force because there is no modulation. And I mean, I think that's the irony of a lot of situations now, because people don't advocate for training, right? Because physical training is not the popular buzzword, right? A lot of the training, if they're going to advocate for any training, is focused on de-escalation, which is typically what they typically mean is verbal de-escalation, even though de-escalation can involve using force to resolve situations, right, with minimal injury. And the irony, like you mentioned, is that you're not going to have the projected comfort or confidence if you don't have the physical piece first, because the officer who will be in the situation, even if they took the class on how to establish rapport and reflective listening and how to talk somebody down, in the back of their head, they will know that if stuff goes wrong, they will know what to do.
Right.
And that is visibly and physically translated through body language and a lot of other ways, like subtle cues that people will pick up on. And anyway, so to summarize, right, the idea of having the comfort to be able to talk to people, part of that comes automatically when you have the physical tools to protect yourself. And that goes for any age range, any job of any person, right? Kids, adults, it's the same.
Yeah. The other thing that I like to make people aware of is, if you don't train officers how to do lateral vascular neck restraints or rear naked choke or sleeper hold, whatever you want to call it, inevitably, this is what's going to happen. Most, if not all departments, they will allow a chokehold in a deadly force situation. So let's say your firearm gets thrown or something like that. It's out of play. You don't have your gun, but the guy's still actually trying to stab you, kill you, do whatever. You don't have the energy anymore to fight. You're almost out of the fight, and you go to a rear naked choke. All right. Let's say you go to that and you put that person out. If you are not trained in it, now you're in a legal gray area because you put him to sleep. And what does any police training tell you? That when the level of force by the bad guy goes down, ours goes down. Well, he's out. And if you don't have the training, you may not recognize that he's out, and you keep holding to the point that you kill him. Now where are we at? Now is the officer going to be held liable because you didn't train him? You didn't let him train. At least let them train to learn how to use the technique. So if they get put in the position, they know when to de-escalate that force or when to bring it down. Does that make sense? Because I think we're hanging officers out to dry by not even letting them learn it.
Yeah. And I'll be devil's advocate now for the other side. And because we already stated that, unfortunately, the amount of on-duty training time that is provided to officers is nowhere close to being the amount of time needed to be proficient in physical hands-on stuff. I mean, it's just not. And will it ever change? Who knows? But if it's going to be like that, then if you add in a tool that is from our training, for sure, a less lethal force option, and you say, hey, a person can do this without any training, that's a potential risk for sure. And I understand that piece. Um, like I said, I think if you're going to say that that's the answer, was it, well, this is potentially a thing that could hurt somebody, so we're not going to allow it. I think that's backwards. You should make it, well, this is a potential tool that is clearly not a uh, lethal force option when you have training. So let's give people training. And but that's I think that's more difficult logistically to do, right? It takes way more time. It takes obviously finances, budget, and it takes a culture shift that will need. I mean, to happen, it has to have. You almost have to have the understanding from the whoever is advocating for the whatever the legislation or the changes are, which would be people in administrative positions, politicians, and I'm not. I mean, there just isn't anybody in those capacities that typically has any training background. So unfortunately, the likelihood of that happening is very low. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to argue it from a practical application standpoint, most people, most people in our work don't have the amount of training time that you would want to be able to deploy something like a technique like that.
Right.
So in that regard, I would from that side of the argument, I would agree. Like, okay, if you barely have enough, first of all, you won't probably even do it correctly, and yeah, you won't have the ability to understand when to modulate and change, right? Because that's the important piece. And if you don't have that, then yeah, like any other force option, you do something incorrectly, it could hurt the other person.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I would love to see it come to fruition. I use Kansas City, Missouri's department quite a bit. They've been using it since the 70s, I think, if maybe earlier, and they've got no line of duty deaths. They've got hundreds, if not thousands, of applications of it. And just like Craig was saying, it most of the time just getting the position of control, which is being set up but not actually applying the choke, has been enough to get at least half of them, 50% of the people, to just give up. And that's what we want. A peaceful arrest, that non-compliance turn into compliance. But I think we've hit all aspects, sir, in an hour. I didn't think we'd be able to do it. I thought for sure I was going to keep you going, but you said you had limited time. So I want to make sure we hit those major portions. And I thank you, man. Your perspective is spot on. I agree with everything you said here today. And I really, man, I'm just honored that you agreed to be on the show. I thank you very much, man.
No, thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. We it's always neat to have a common connection with another person in our work. And I mean, Jiu-Jitsu is one of those things, like we talked about, that as it's a thing that it bridges people from walks of life that may not have otherwise interacted. I think it seems like it's shifting towards a direction of having more people in our line of work accepting it. Because, I mean, like you mentioned, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it was super unusual to see maybe a video like somebody training in uniform. And I feel like now it's not as big of a deal. And maybe 5 years from now, it'll be insignificant. Like, yeah, like that's what happens, hopefully. And I think it seems like the direction is going that way, which is good for everybody, not just us, the community too. And yeah, it's a neat thing to hear people talking about something like jiu-jitsu, because it's so many things at the same time, right? For lots of people, the physical aspect, the practical application, the fitness benefits, the emotional benefit, right? The stress release, the tactile comfort that you get from being in close quarters, the tactical, short-term, long-term kind of thinking person's kind of exercises, brain exercises. There's so many things about the art that are beneficial. I think the hard part is, if you want as much people to try it out, I think the challenge is going to be how do you introduce it in a way that is most likely to have people want to come back. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Like I said, my friend Victor, he's actually doing his he's going from Washington down the coast and then cutting east at some point across the country, hopefully in his van. To he's a brown belt as well from a former UFC guy named Ivan Salaverry, who's in Washington, and he's going around to hit different gyms all over the country. Hopefully, it's talking to instructors and interviewing them, and trying to figure out how is the best way to get people introduced to the art, or how to get more people training and more people to stay training. And that's a big challenge, right? Like, the attrition rate for people who start jiu-jitsu is super high.
Yep.
And one of the reasons why it's so high is because partially the way that it is introduced is incorporates live sparring very quickly. Sometimes the first day, you start sparring, and some people are so that's why some people enjoy it, because of the amount of validity that it creates right away, right off the bat, and that's good for some people. But I think for a lot of people, that's not the ideal way, because especially people who are smaller, older, whatever, a woman. I mean, some people, they're not gonna even if they see that that's the first day, they're not gonna even do it. And then that's the biggest kind of, to me, downside of that introduction is it's very effective, and it obviously shows that it works because you can feel the techniques or whatever. But I mean, some people who need it the most, they don't want to do it because of that introduction. So how do we, I think it takes us, it makes, you should assess that and be like, take a step back and, well, what can we do to fix that? Because I mean, if the whole point of the art is to empower, right, one of the points, the main benefits, get people who allow people who are not big, strong people like me to be able to have a chance and experience it. Like, what things can we do to make it more accessible to those people? And I would include people like kids in the same boat, teens, domestic violence survivors. It's not easy to that kind of approach of like we'll just start rolling around. I mean, there's some people, I have some coworkers who just started training that that's their favorite part, but not everybody's like that. And one of the challenges to get people to kind of reassess and say, okay, well, should we think about doing classes that are just beginner classes, even just think of some fundamental movements without any sparring in it, so people don't have to worry about getting hurt and they can go to the job afterwards. And then at some point it transitions to, okay, now we're going to give you this, after you have this foundation, okay, you can go for it, you know. At least you have a base at that point. But anyway, that could be a whole nother
I like to tell, and I'll end on this, I like to tell people that are trying to get into jiu-jitsu, your expectations need to be made out front. And if an instructor can do this, it really helps. And maybe this will help your friend in his studies as he goes across. But ego is a big killer of people dropping out of jiu-jitsu. If you go in with the expectation you're going to lose, and you're going to lose often, and losing is a mindset. When you go into jiu-jitsu, it's about your journey. You're not going against anybody else. It's just you. You're trying to get better for yourself. It doesn't matter if you didn't submit this guy. It doesn't matter if you didn't, get him to tap out, get him, in a submission, didn't get him, put him to sleep, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you're getting crushed. Like, you are going to learn it. It will happen. There will be a flip of the switch. It happens for us all. But the trick is staying and practicing until that switch goes off. And when it goes off, the addiction really hits. And that's what I try to tell people. Like, if you can stay until that switch goes off, then it becomes your chances of staying will hit so much farther. And then for those that get past that first switch, just know there's going to be 10 to 15 more switches minimum that will go off again, because you'll think as a blue belt, oh man, I got this stuff down now. And then you go against the purple belt he's been a purple belt for quite a long time, and you're going to be right back at that bottom level again. You're going to get crushed all over again. It's a process of losing, and then it triggers and you start to get it and you start building. And then again, losing, and then it triggers and you build again. And that is jiu-jitsu, and that's the path, and that's the fun. That's the addiction. And then figuring out your own paths and changing the game and being those guys that create, double buggies and what all the other crazy stuff I've been seeing out there lately. So there's these moves, and that is jiu-jitsu. If you can wrap that around your head when you first start, that you're going to lose a lot, but you're still learning. You are learning the entire time you're losing. I promise. It's the whole Mr. Miyagi technique. Wax on, wax off. You don't think you're learning shit, and then all of a sudden you're awesome.
Great.
So, well, all right, brother. I want you to stay safe out there. I appreciate your time. And you got any closing words?
No, yeah. If anybody's interested, they can have an Instagram. Just my name, Craig Hanaumi, CraigHanaumi. And there's a Facebook equivalent. I try to post training related things, outreach related stuff. It's a platform that I feel like I started when I was about maybe 6-7 years ago, to at least show my friends that there's good interactions happening out there. And it was during a time when it seemed like the only ones that were being showed were negative ones, and it was a very big contrast to what I was experiencing personally. So I started to share some of them on that platform, just to, like I said, for my friends. And it slowly started to morph into a little bit more of a platform to be able to educate, as well as just share stuff about our work that may not be seen a lot of times by other people besides the people who are directly in contact with us. So anyway, I try to keep it positive on there, and that's some people want to look at it. It's at Craig Hanaumi.
All right, brother. I got it. I will link all that stuff when this episode posts next Thursday, and I'll send the link to you, and you can share it with all your friends, and they can check you out, bro.
Appreciate it.
All right, Craig.
Thanks,
take it easy, brother.